All right. Just wanted to say welcome, everyone. Really appreciate you sharing your time and attention with us today. My name is Michael Vaughn. I'm an academic technologist here in academic technologies. I've been working in higher ed primarily for about 15 years or so, including mostly training, support, and administrative work with Moodle, which is the technology that powers As You Learn. What I usually try and tell folks is to spend some time learning the tools that you use frequently. And As You Learn is, I think, a really great example of that. As You Learn is a learning management system, and there are a couple of different learning management systems out there. Some learning management systems, I say, are sort of like a pocket knife. They do one thing, they do that one thing well. As You Learn is a little bit more like a Leatherman or a multi-tool, where it can do a lot of different things, which works really well for App State because we have thousands of faculty, we have tens of thousands of students, so we need a tool that's a bit more flexible. The downside to flexibility is because you have a lot of options, it's sometimes hard to focus in and figure out what should I be paying attention to, what matters most to me. So this session is designed to help you focus in on the gradebook in particular. And we're going to cut through some of the extra stuff in there and focus on what I think are probably the most essential things to know about the gradebook from the ground up. So I'm going to spend about 20 minutes talking about the three most commonly used methods that faculty use to calculate their grades in As You Learn here at App State. And then I'm going to do a live demonstration of how to set up your gradebook, including 4 views, or sometimes they're called reports, in the gradebook to give you a better idea of how you can get a bit more out of that space. So the first question that I think is a bit reasonable to start with is, where do grades come from in As You Learn? How do grades get to the gradebook? And the cool thing is, As You Learn tries to handle a lot of stuff for you along the way. So if you do something like create a quiz in your course, or an assignment, or a forum, those are graded activities, which means that when you create those activities, a corresponding column is automatically created for them in your gradebook, as well as a total column that is calculating a course total for you. So a lot of that actually happens by default. You can create your own categories in the gradebook if you wanted to provide credit for something like an in-class presentation, or attending a campus event, something like that. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a little bit. But generally speaking, a lot of the work is handled for you behind the scenes automatically. So as you create those graded activities, it's automatically creating gradebook columns. There's always going to be a course total. So the trick is more so configuring the gradebook and telling As You Learn, I want my grades calculated in this way and not that way. Which brings us to the next question, which is, how do I calculate grades in As You Learn? And there are 3 different ways that most faculty tend to use. So the faculty at App State tend to use one of these 3 ways of combining their grades, or I'm sorry, calculating their grades. Sometimes a combination of 1 or 2. And I promise that even if you're only using one of these, it is helpful to know all 3. If you try to figure out how do I translate how I want my grades to be calculated into one of those methods, I can simplify that down to 2 questions for you. The first question is, are you weighting grades with points or percentages? And what I mean by that is, if your grading system looks something like this, where all the quizzes are worth 50%, all the assignments are worth 20%, forums are worth 15%, etc., you are weighting your grades. So you're going to use a method that we'll talk about last called weighted mean of grades. This is actually a quick way to figure out what you're doing. So that's the first question. The second question, if that didn't help you determine what you're going to use to calculate your grades, is, how do you want your course total calculated? Do you want your course total to be the total number of points a student could have earned? Or do you want that course total to display as something like 100 instead? So by default, essentially, if you're grading something, you are looking at the number of points a student earned out of the number of points a student could have earned. That's one way to display your grades in As You Learn, to calculate your grades. There's another option that's very similar, where it takes that grade and then scales it to a 100-point scale. So those are the options that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about weighted, we're going to talk about something called natural, and we're going to talk about something called simple weighted. Let's talk about natural first. So natural grading is the default grading method in As You Learn. This is a pretty commonly used one if folks are not weighting their grades. And if you're wondering, like, why is it called natural? It's because it's how most people naturally grade. For example, if I was a student in your course and you gave me a 5-question quiz and I answer the first 4 questions correctly, but I get the last one wrong, you would look at that grade and say, okay, Michael earned 4 points and he could have earned 5 points. So his grade is 4 out of 5 points. In other words, my grade is 4 points. The total that I could have earned is 5 points. And that is how the grade is calculated. So natural is just the number of points your students have earned out of the number of points they could have earned. And that's scaled all the way up to the course total, not just individual activities. There are 2 other things that are helpful to know about natural. The first is that the points determine the weight of grades in natural. And that means that if you have a 25-point assignment and a 50-point assignment, that 50-point assignment has twice the weight because it has twice the point value. The other thing that I really want to reiterate about natural, because this sometimes is a point of confusion, especially halfway through the semester, is the course total in natural always equals the number of available points that have been entered. So when I say the number of available points are points the students could have earned based off of what's been entered. So if this is my course setup and I have 4 grades that are worth 25 points each, I would expect my course total to be 100. But under natural, it's the total number of available points. So if I've only entered in 2 of those grades, the course total at that point is actually only 50. This also means that as you're entering grades in the gradebook, if you enter grades for some students, but not others, it is possible and in fact likely that you will see different course totals throughout the semester as grades are being entered. That's because the course total dynamically changes to the number of points that student could have earned. So if you entered grades for one student but not the other, they will have different course totals. So again, under natural, the points determine the weight, and the grade is calculated by looking at the number of points the students earned out of the number of points they could have earned. So the default in AsULearn, it's how most people prefer to calculate their grades. There is a similar grading method called simple weighted mean of grades. And why is it called simple weighted mean of grades? It's because it simplifies how the course total is displayed by weighting everything to a 100-point scale. So here's what that looks like in practice. Again, let's go back to that quiz. I'm a student in your course. You give me that 5-question quiz. I get the first 4 questions right, but I get the last question wrong. So you would look at my grade and go, okay, let's see. Michael earned 4 points out of 5 points. So just like natural, the number of points I earned out of the number of points I could have earned. So that's my grade. But simple weighted mean of grades then scales it to the course total, which is weighted at 100 by default. So my grade would display as 80 points out of 100 points. So just like natural, again, it's the number of points the student earned out of the number of points they could have earned, then scaled to a 100-point scale. So it's a very simple way to do weighting without doing things like every quiz is, or the quizzes are collectively worth 50%. Instead, it still calculates it like natural and then converts it to a 100-point scale. There are 2 other things that are really helpful to know about simple weighted mean of grades, and that is just like natural, the points determine the weight. So a 25-point assignment and a 50-point assignment, that 50-point assignment has twice the weight because it has twice the point value. This also means that the course total will always be out of 100, which is the default. You can change this to another value, but the default is 100. So that means that even if I have a course with 400 available points, that grade, let's say if I've entered 2 of those, so I've got 200 points entered, will always be converted to a 100-point scale. That's true even if you enter in grades for some students but not others. That grade will always be out of 100 or whatever you set the course total to be. So again, with simple weighted mean of grades, the points determine the weight, and it's calculated just like natural, which is the number of points a student earned out of the number of points they could have earned, which is then scaled to a 100-point scale. So a very simple way to weight your grades. If you are weighting your grades, so like all your quizzes are worth 50% as an example, it is still helpful to know how natural and simple weighted mean of grades works. The reason for that is if you are weighting your grades, you're going to need to create categories. So all of your quizzes need to be combined into one grade. All of your assignments need to be combined into one grade as an example. And when you combine those things, you're going to use something that AsULearn calls a category. And you're going to need to tell AsULearn how to calculate all of your quiz grades into one grade. So you're going to use something like natural or simple weighted mean of grades to do that. So that's where it's helpful to know what all of these do and how they work. That does bring us over to weighted mean of grades. So if you are weighting your grades, what that means is your grading policy probably looks like this. Again, quizzes are worth like 50% of your grade, assignments are worth 20%, forums are worth 15%, participation worth 15%. So in other words, you've looked at all of the grades available in your course, 100% of those grades, and you've broken them up into chunks that are worth different percentages of the course total. And as you learn, these different groups are, again, called categories, and we'll create those on the gradebook setup page. I'll show you what that looks like in just a couple of minutes. Let's pick one of these categories. Let's say that 50%, which was, again, our quizzes. Essentially what's happening is we're taking multiple grades, in this case, 4 quiz grades, and we're using a category to combine them all together to have one representative grade. So we're still going to have 4 individual grades, but they will be added separately into one individual grade, which will then become a part of the course total. To put this another way, let's say we've got 8 assignments and we've got 6 forum posts and we've got 4 quizzes, and we decide to break our course up like this, where assignments are 60%, forums are 30%, quizzes are 10%. Essentially how that works is, as I am completing grades in your course, you're still going to look at that quiz where I got the 4 questions right and the 1 question wrong, and you'll still grade it normally, right? Michael earned 4 points out of 5 points, but then that is going to be scaled to the weight that you've assigned to that type of an activity. It's going to be scaled to the weight of the category that you put it in, or the weight that you assign. So I might have earned 4 points out of 5 points on the quiz, but if my quizzes are 50% of my course grade, it's going to be treated as if it were 40 points out of 50 points in the course total. So it automatically scales to that. And that is regardless of how many points you have. I lovingly say that if you are weighting your grades, the points don't matter. What matters is the weight, because I could have a quiz that's worth 4 points out of 5 points, or I could have 4 quiz grades that add up to 360 out of 400 points. But if I weight those at 50%, then that grade will always be scaled to that thing. So I sometimes lovingly tell people, like, you could have an assignment that's worth 10 points and another that's worth 10,000. If they have the same weight, they have the same weight in the course total. So the points don't matter nearly as much. This is essentially what's happening. So in this case, I've got 4 quiz grades. I've earned 360 out of 400 points. On a 50-point scale, that means I've earned 45 of the 50 points available for the quizzes category. That is assigned this way, and that continues for all the categories in my course. Those points are eventually added up on a 100-point scale, and my course total is determined that way. I will show you what weighting looks like here in a little bit. You can use it on a 100-point scale. You can use it on a 10-point scale. You can use it on a 1-point scale. It will still calculate the exact same total at the end of the day. But this is essentially how it works. It's sort of like asking your students to calculate their GPA. 2 things that are really helpful to know about weighted mean of grades. The first is that the weight that you set in gradebook setup determines the weight compared to other grades in the course. So under natural or simple weighted mean of grades, the point total determines the weight. Under weighted mean of grades, the weight that you assign determines the weight. So again, you could have a 5-point assignment and a 500-point assignment, but if you assign them both the same weight in gradebook setup, they are equal in the eyes of how the course total is calculated. Another thing to keep in mind is that the course total is the sum of all weighted grades that have been entered. This is going to calculate somewhat like natural. You remember with natural, the course total dynamically changes. In weighted mean of grades, the weight dynamically changes as you enter grades. So in this setup, I have 4 categories of grades that are worth 25% of the course total each. If I've only entered in grades in 2 of those categories, well, it's not very fair for my students to only have a 50% in that course. So instead, what's going to happen is they are going to be scaled up to what they would be out of my 100-point scale. So if I'm looking at these 2 assignments, or these 2 categories, and they're worth 25% each, that means that they have equal weight because they have the same value. That 25% scaled to a 100-point scale would mean that they are calculated at that point in time as 50% each, because that's what they would be out of 100. So the weights will dynamically change as you enter in grades. Once you have grades for everything that you've weighted in the course, those weights will be applied the way that you originally configure. But again, they do dynamically change throughout the course. So if you've entered in grades for some students but not others, what that means is that, if Kit Hawk over here has 25% of their course total in quizzes and 25% in papers, but Winston-Salem has, 50% of their grade over here entered, that means that they are essentially receiving the same grades because this 50% weight is scaled up to 100%. These two grades are weighted equally and scaled up to 100%. So you're going to end up with like the same total. So sometimes throws people off that the weights are not what they expect mid-semester, but it's actually working as designed because the weights are dynamically changing. It's not fair to calculate grades that the students haven't received yet. So again, in weighted mean of grades, the weight that you set in gradebook setup determines the weight, and the grades are essentially calculated using a method that you determine, like natural or simple way of mean of grades, and then scaled to whatever you have weighted that grade at. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. Let's hop over to an AsULearn course, just a sample course that I use for demonstrations. And we'll talk about how to set up our gradebook, and then we'll talk about some views in the gradebook. To access your gradebook, if this is relatively unfamiliar for you, there's a settings bar at the top of your course. You click grades to access your gradebook. You likely also have something called the quick set block in your block drawer over on the right, where you can easily hide or show the gradebook from students. What some instructors will do, or what I've suggested in the past, is if you're setting up your gradebook or you're making some changes, you can always hide your gradebook, make those changes, and then set it to be visible again. So you don't have to make it available while you're trying to set things up. You can actually hide it from the students and then make it available later. I'm going to open up grades here. And this is by default going to take me to a section of the gradebook called the grader report. The grader report is your overall gradebook. All student grades for all activities in your course will appear here in grader report. I do want to call out a couple of features before we get into the setup, just so that you have a better idea of what you can do on this page. One is there is a search bar. So if you have quite a few students in your course and you're looking for someone in particular, like if I'm looking for Bessie Coleman here, I can easily find Bessie and then see the gradebook or see the grader report just with her grades. Go ahead and clear that. There's also an option to filter by first and last name if you need it. And one thing that I want to point out about the interface is that the header row with the names of your activities, the footer with the total grades, and the column with student names are all sticky. And what that means is you can see this footers here. It's following me as I scroll up and down the page. Same goes for the header. I'm going to have to make this very, very large for a moment, but you can see this top row here with my assignments and whatnot. As I scroll up and down, that follows me up and down the page. So it's always visible. And the same goes for my student name column. So as I scroll left and right in grader report, my student names stick with me. One new change in AsULearn as of this summer is the full name of your activity will now display in grader report. I do recommend folks not include things like due dates in the names of the activities. You can include that in the settings of the activity and it'll automatically populate for the students and display for them. So you really don't need to put that in the name. It also creates a little bit of a headache for you in future semesters because you have to update the name of every single activity. That can also add some extra unnecessary length and make this header column a bit taller in grader report and make it harder for you to see certain things. So just something to keep in mind. You can enter grades from this mode, but I think there's a view that makes it a bit easier to do things like that. That'll show you towards the end of the session. But if you get to, mid-semester, and there are some grades in here that you don't really need to see anymore, but they're right up front because this is ordered based off of how they've been added to the course. There's a little ellipsis menu here for actions. You can click on that and choose collapse. So you can actually start collapsing some of these columns. They'll take up less space. It's easier for you to scroll left and right and not see some of those things. If you collapse a column, it'll show up as a plus icon. You can always click to re-expand it. You'll also get this handy collapsed columns menu that automatically populates. It's searchable. You can pick and choose which ones you want to make visible again, or just select all and show those one more time. But let's talk about how Gradebook setup works. To access that, you're going to use this navigation menu over here. And what you're looking for is Gradebook setup. It's going to be a little bit further down. This menu will always be named after the page that you are on. And gradebook setup is where you can calculate or choose how your grades are calculated in the course. There are a couple of things I want to call out here just off the top. The first is this really handy status column. This is one of my favorite things that was added in the summer update because it clearly describes how your grades are being calculated and any other extra changes that you might have made to the course total or a category that you might be using. So in this case, it's telling me that I'm using natural. It's also telling me that I have a setting enabled called exclude empty grades. For almost every gradebook situation, I recommend leaving exclude empty grades checked. This is a default setting. We've gotten a lot of tickets this semester about the gradebook from folks who have unchecked this and turned the setting off. Exclude empty grades means that if you have not entered a grade, it's not counted into the course total. When that is unchecked and disabled, every grade that you have not entered counts against the course total. So you have students who end up with like a 13%, and it's week 6 of the semester, right? So I'll show you where that is here in just a little bit, but just something to keep in mind. Since I'm calculating with natural, it's the number of points my students earned out of the number of points. Is someone, I can't tell if someone unmuted.
I have a question. Sorry, I don't have a video. When you were collapsing the columns, that was a good way so you could see more things. Is there a quick way to like change the zoom so that you can, like, sometimes it's like tedious to scroll back and forth on the bottom to try to see all the grades at once? Is there a way to zoom it really fast?
In terms of like collapsing all the columns or seeing just the total columns?
Report. Like, I just want to see the student's name and all of their grades without having to scroll.
Yes, I will. I will show you a view that does that towards the end of the session, like a special view that will streamline that for you. Since natural is based around the number of grades or number of points a student earned out of the number of points they could have earned, what you're going to see by default on the gradebook setup is best case scenario. So that means I have 1,000 total points in my course. That's how many points my students could earn. I'll also see a list of every grade in my course and what its current point total is. Natural includes a weights column. The weights are determined by the point value and they are calculated automatically, but if I find myself kind of painted into a corner by a mistake that I've made, this is an area where I can get a second chance. I will say that the AsULearn Gradebook is very forgiving, is very difficult to break things. The edits are something that I call non-destructive edits, which means anything you change here, you can always change back. It's just telling AsULearn how you want the math to work. So you're not going to break anything. You're not going to destroy anything. Even if you accidentally delete an entire column or an activity of grades, there is a way to still find out what those grades were. So it's very forgiving. I promise. There's a lot of cool stuff in here that make it. I recognize that because there are a lot of settings, it doesn't always feel user friendly, but it is very accommodating, and we've always been able to like rescue any gradebook challenges that we've come across. As an example, with those weights in natural, usually I would say don't change those because they're calculated automatically, but I had this example assignment at the beginning of the semester and I accidentally left it at 100 points. I only wanted that to be 10 points. So, let's say since that's supposed to be only 10% of its value, let me change its weight from 10 down to 1. And as I say that, it'll automatically update all the others for me. And then I just need to save my changes. Now, one thing that I do want to call out in the gradebook that I find to be pretty helpful, it was added this summer, is this sticky footer. So this will always follow you as you scroll up and down the page. And what I like about it is that it changes based off of where you are and what you're doing. So if I'm on gradebook setup and I change something here, I'll have an option to save those changes. That'll just show up right here in my footer. And I have ready access to it, which is very, very helpful. I can also just come back and change it back. And again, it's just changing how the math is calculating. So that's natural right there. Let's talk about simple way of mean of grades next. And the way that you would change how your grades are calculated is you're looking for that top row of this table on gradebook setup, the one that has the name of your course. Your course is essentially a category in and of itself. So there's sort of a parent category for all the grades in your course that generates the course total. And then you can optionally create additional categories if you're going to be weighting your grades, which is what we'll look at after we talk about simple weighted mean of grades. So I'm looking for this top row with the name of my course, and I'm looking for this actions column down at the end with that little ellipsis menu to open up some cell actions. So if I want to change how my grades are calculated, I would open up this menu and I would choose edit category right there at the top. The second option from the top is going to be called aggregation. That's just a fancy way to say how my grades are calculated. And this is where you can choose how you want your grades to be calculated. Again, our recommendations are natural, simple weighted mean of grades, or weighted mean of grades for folks. So I'm going to change the course calculation over to simple weighted mean of grades. I'm going to leave exclude empty grades checked because I don't want empty grades to count as a 0 against my students. And I'm going to save. This will refresh the page. And now my grades are calculated as simple weighted mean of grades, still excluding those empty grades. And there are two changes that you might have noticed on this page. The first is that there's no weight column anymore. It's because, again, the point total is determining the weight. So the points of each individual activity are determining the weight. And my max grade is now 100, which is the default under simple weighted mean of grades. I could certainly change this to something else like 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000, really whatever I want. But the default is 100. I like it because it calculates grades out of 100. So it looks like a percentage to the students. So this is a pretty simple change. Simple way of mean of grades. Again, it's going to take all the grades that the students earned out of the number of points that they could have earned and then calculate what it would be if that was out of 100 instead. The next thing I'm going to do is we're going to talk about weighted mean of grades. But before I change over using the exact same steps that we just used, editing that category for your course, changing the grade aggregation method, I'm actually going to preset my categories because I find it to be a little bit more efficient to do it this way. So if you look here, I've got an assignment that's all on its own, but I have 3 quizzes. I have, it looks like 3 forum grades and 3 lessons. And I want all my lessons to be worth 1 grade, I want all my forums to be worth 1 grade, I want all my quizzes to be worth 1 grade. So I need to create some categories. And categories are a way to collect a group of grades together and create one representative grade that is then, let's say, 60% of the course total or 40% of the course total, whatever it is. To add a category for those, there's a little add menu at the top of the page. And I'm going to click category. And this is just a little popover menu. So I'm going to name this one quizzes. On this page, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you do have to choose an aggregation for this. So how do you want that category grade to be calculated? I tend to lean towards the default in here, which is simple weighted mean of grades. So that tends to be my preference. Some folks do natural, but what I like about simple weighted mean of grades is it calculates each category out of 100 points. So each category looks like a percentage to the students. The other thing you can do is, since my quizzes are going to be worth, let's say 50% of my course total, I can also set the maximum grade to 50. So as quiz grades are entered, they're automatically scaled to what they would be out of 50, which might also help my students figure out how to calculate their final grade a little bit more effectively. So I'll go ahead and click save here. The page will refresh, and now I've got that category down here at the bottom. That was the slow way to do it. I'm going to go a little bit faster. I need one for forums. One thing that I'll call out on the category settings page is you do have the option to drop the lowest or keep the highest number of grades. Drop the lowest tends to be pretty popular with folks. Maybe drop the one lowest grade. Let's say my forums are going to be 20% of the grade. And I need one for lessons. I'll make one more category. This is for lessons. I want my weight for that to be 20 as well. And from here, I just need to start sorting things into the categories I've created. So I've got categories for quizzes, forums, and lessons. Let me go over and find my quizzes. I've got 3 of them here. And since I've created categories, there's actually something new on the page, and that is a list of checkboxes next to everything that I've created. And if I use these checkboxes, what's going to happen is you're going to see a move icon appear down here in the sticky footer. So the moment that I select something, I now get a fancy move icon because it's contextually responding to what I'm trying to do. If I click that, I'll get a quick option to select where I want to move these things. So I'll click quizzes, and this move button over here. Page will refresh, and it moves all of my quizzes into that quizzes category. These are collapsible. So if you find that there's just a bit too much on screen that you don't want to look at, you can collapse those and it should remember your settings. Let me go ahead and move my forums next using the same process. So I'm just going to check those boxes next to them, click that move icon, then select where I want it to go. I'm going to move my lessons now. And now I have all of my categories created. I have all of my activities moved where I want them to go. I know this seems a little backwards, but I'll show you why I like to do this. It just makes things a little bit more efficient when we switch over. So now I'm going to switch over how my grade is calculated at the course level by editing that category and choosing weighted mean of grades instead. When the page refreshes, I'm going to have that weights column back again. And this is where I can choose what the weight of each thing is going to be. Now, you might have noticed that I do have an assignment in this course, but I didn't make a category for it. That's because I only have one assignment. So there's really no need to create a category for one grade because you can just apply a grade or a weight to that one grade. So with my assignment here, I'm going to call that 10. My quizzes were worth 50%. My forums are worth 20%. And my lessons are worth 20%. And since I'm entering in those weights, I've got that Save Changes button down here in the footer. And it automatically applied my weights for me. Again, since AsULearn is designed to be very flexible, some people weight on a 1-point scale or a 10-point scale or a 100-point scale. So AsULearn is not going to keep track of whether or not your weights add up to 100. Some faculty even use a weight of, let's say, 101%, so they can throw a little extra credit in there. So just bear in mind that you're going to have to check your work and make sure that matches up with your syllabus on here. But I've got weights in here that I do know add up to 100%. And that's really all there is to it. Let's talk about a couple of other views that I find to be really, really helpful. I'm going to go back to Grader Report. And this goes back to a question that I believe it was Edgar who asked a little bit earlier. You know, you have a student. How do I see all that student's grades just in one spot without having to scroll back and forth? Because we've got a lot of grades in here. You know, is there a way to make this smaller, a little bit more efficient? And there's a really cool view that I love in this. You know, you can click this little navigation menu. It's called Single View. And Single View allows you to view all grades for one student or all student grades for one activity. So in other words, it's a single view for all student grades for one activity, or a single view of all students' grades, or all grades for a single student. There, you can certainly use this menu to access single view that way, you know, the old-fashioned way, but then you have to go through some extra steps to pick what you want to look at. What I prefer to do in Grader Report is if I have, you know, my example assignment here, there's that little ellipsis menu. If I open that, one of the options right up top is single view for this item. So since I picked it for a gradebook column, it's going to show me all student grades for that single activity. But I've got a menu like that next to the student names as well. So if I come to Shirley here and I click the actions menu by Shirley's name, there's a single view for this user link, and that will show me all grades for Shirley. So all grades for a single student. It's a quick way to get in between. And again, that footer is going to dynamically update because of us being in single view. So now I've got some quick navigation between the different students in my course that appears in that footer. This is also a view where you can update grades if you want to. I personally like to use it just to get a better feel for like how are students performing on an activity, or if a student says, hey, I want to meet during office hours, this is a quick way for me to pull up all of Shirley's grades in a single table that's a little bit easier to navigate than Grader Report. But if in single view I happen to turn editing on in my course, again, extra menu called the actions menu. And this will let me do things like override their grades or bulk insert grades. So to give you an example of where this can be really, really helpful, let me pick an example assignment in here. Most of the time you are going to be doing the grading in the activity itself in the course. So if you make an assignment, make a forum, make a quiz, you're doing the grading inside that activity. Those grades are then pushed to the gradebook. But, you know, if you had a quiz in week 1 of the course and that quiz is done, and if the students haven't done it by now, they've got a 0. One thing that you can use that actions menu for in single view is to say, hey, let's bulk insert grades here. I understand what I'm about to do. And for all empty grades, grades that haven't been entered, let's just add in a 0. So I haven't done it. We're going to give them a 0 here. And you can click save, and it will automatically enter a grade of 0 anywhere there is no grade yet. The one thing that I want to point out is to be very, very cautious in single view. If you enter a grade here that is overridden, AsULearn has a very much like a yes boss, whatever you say type of approach to things, where it's like what you say goes. You are the last word on anything gradebook related. So AsULearn is always going to follow your directions to the T. So if you say, hey, this grade is actually, out of 100, this grade is 80, that means that even if you were to update this grade, or if the student were to take the quiz again, the new grade will not push to the gradebook because you have told the gradebook that the grade should be 80. So if a grade is overridden, that is the grade until you remove that override or manually change it yourself. So something to keep in mind there. There are a couple of other views that I find to be really helpful that I just wanted to mention as we get towards the end here. You can also access them through that navigation feature or that navigation menu. The first is grade history. Now, I'm not going to do a demo of grade history. I just want you to know that it exists, because anytime you change a grade, any grade in AsULearn, even if you happen to delete a grade or delete a graded activity, that is logged, and you can search through those logs in grade history. So everything is there. AsULearn is very forgiving. It is a very soft landing. I promise it is very difficult to irreparably break things in AsULearn. So grade history will keep track of everything that changed and who changed it and when. The other thing that I wanted to call out for you here in this navigation menu is something called user reports, just under single view. And user report is essentially a response to a very common question we get, which is, how do I see what my students are seeing when they check their grades? User report shows you a preview of what the students see when they check the gradebook. And this used to be a little drop-down menu. We've put in a feature request to bring that back. But as a little tip, if you don't want to search for a specific user, the trick that I use is to search for no one. So I just click in that box, I hit enter, and it will pull up all of my students. So this is essentially what grades look like to your students when they check their grades in their course. So if someone says, hey, my grades aren't showing up just right, you can actually use user report to see, what Shirley sees to get a better feel for, is it actually displaying the way that I want, which is really helpful for troubleshooting any potential issues. So those are the views that I wanted to share with you. We've got grader report, we've got gradebook setup, we've got single view, and we've got user report. I love to throw gradebook or grade history in there as well, just so that you know it exists. I am going to provide this recording later today when it's ready. I'm going to include some additional resources in that email that goes out to you. And we also have a ton of professional development that is coming up next week. I'm going to include links to those in my email to you in case you are interested. But to give you an example, we're going to do speed geeking, which is sort of like speed dating for tech tools. I'm going to do another session of the AI for teaching and learning session about Microsoft Copilot, which is a free generative AI tool you have access through your AppState account. Alt text in AsULearn, and some AsULearn hacks for teaching and learning, just some little tips and tricks. So all that is coming to you a little bit later today. In the meantime, I'm going to stop that recording,